The city was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of a cold night. Streetlights flickered faintly against the damp pavement, casting long, eerie shadows across the empty roads. It was a night like any other, until a German shepherd appeared, sprinting through the silent streets. His eyes filled with urgency. Rex ran without stopping, weaving through alleyways, dodging the occasional passing car. His mission was clear: he had to find help. As he reached the front of the police station, he came to an abrupt stop. And then, he barked. Once, twice, then again and again. Each bark more desperate than the last. Inside, Officer Jake Reynolds was gathering his things. His shift was almost over. He was ready to go home. But the barking made him pause. At first, he dismissed it as background noise. But when it grew louder, sharper, more urgent, he sighed, walked toward the door, and stepped outside. That is when he saw him. A German shepherd, standing alone in the dark. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Jake felt it. This was not just a stray dog. There was something else in those eyes. A plea, a warning. Rex moved toward him, tugged at the hem of his pants, then turned and took off running. Jake froze. His instincts told him this was real. He grabbed his flashlight and followed. Rex led him through dimly lit streets, his movements quick but deliberate. He did not stop, he did not slow. They turned into a narrow alleyway. The smell of damp concrete and old trash hung in the air. Only the weak glow of a faraway street lamp lit the path ahead. But Jake could already see it. A shadowed figure slumped against the wall. He stepped closer, and his chest tightened. It was a young woman, frail, unmoving, her arms wrapped tightly around two tiny infants. Their faces pale, their breathing faint in the icy air. Jake crouched beside them. He scanned the woman's face. Her lips were dry, her breath shallow. She was slipping away. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked. His voice steady, but urgent. There was no response. Only the tightening of her arms around the children. A mother's instinct, refusing to let go. Beside him, Rex let out a soft whine, then gently nudged her arm with his nose. Jake looked again. The dog had been curled close to them, shielding their bodies with his warmth, protecting them with everything he had. Jake reached out and touched one of the infants. Their skin was ice cold. His heart pounded. There was no time. He pulled off his heavy police jacket and wrapped it around all three of them. "This is Officer Reynolds," he said into his radio. "I need an ambulance, immediately. I have a woman and two infants in critical condition, alleyway off South and Main." The radio crackled. "Copy that, dispatching now." Jake exhaled sharply, then turned back to the mother and her children. He was not going to let them slip away. Not tonight. "Help is coming," Jake said gently, his voice low but steady. The woman blinked slowly. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Rex remained beside her. His eyes never left her face. He leaned forward, pressing his nose gently against one of the babies, as if checking for a sign of life. Jake swallowed hard. This dog had not just found them. He had been with them the entire time. He had never left their side. And in that moment, Jake understood something with complete clarity. Rex had saved their lives. The distant sound of sirens pierced the night. Jake exhaled in relief. The red and blue lights grew brighter. Reflections danced across the wet pavement. Rex's ears perked up. But he did not move. He stayed close, his body pressed against Emily and the two fragile infants, as if to say, "You are safe now. I am still here." The ambulance screeched to a halt. Doors flew open. Paramedics rushed forward with medical bags in hand. "What's the situation?" one of them asked, kneeling beside Jake. "The mother's barely responsive," Jake replied quickly. "The babies are freezing, shallow breathing. I think they have been exposed for too long." A paramedic pressed 2 fingers against the woman's neck. "Her pulse is weak, but she is hanging on." Another began unwrapping the thin blankets around the infants. "They are in critical condition. We need to get them warmed immediately." As they worked, Rex grew uneasy. His body tensed. His tail stiff. His eyes fixed on the hands touching the woman and her babies. He did not growl. But the message was clear. He did not trust them yet. Jake reached down and placed his hand gently on Rex's head. "It is okay, buddy. They are here to help." Rex let out a soft whine. His ears flicked back. But he did not resist. He stayed right where he was, watching every movement. The team moved fast. The babies were secured in thermal wraps. The mother lifted onto a stretcher. "Let's go!" a paramedic called out. They began loading them into the ambulance. Rex lunged forward. His claws scraped the pavement. He pushed against the paramedics. "Hold on," one of them said, blocking the dog. "We cannot take animals inside." Rex barked. Loud, sharp, desperate. His whole body trembled. His tail stiff. His ears pinned back. He tried again, pushing past the arm in his way. His eyes darted from the closing doors, to Jake. To Rex. This was not just a hospital run. They were taking away the only family he had ever known. Jake stepped in, his voice firm. "Wait. This dog found them. He did not just leave me here. He has been protecting them, every second." The paramedic paused. He looked at Jake. Then back at Rex. Jake crouched beside the dog. His eyes locked onto Rex's deep brown stare. "Listen to me, Rex. They are going to be okay. I promise." But Rex was not convinced. His tail twitched. His breathing was heavy. As if letting them out of his sight meant something terrible might happen. After a long second, Jake made a decision. "I will follow behind the ambulance," he told Rex. "I will make sure they are safe," Jake said softly. For the first time, Rex looked at him, not as another officer, but as someone he could trust. With one last glance toward the ambulance doors, Rex stepped back, slowly. The vehicle pulled away, its lights disappearing into the night. Jake placed a hand on Rex's back. "Come on, boy," he murmured. "Let us go make sure they are okay." And together, they headed toward the hospital. The emergency room was alive with urgency. Doctors and nurses rushed Emily and the babies into critical care. Their voices quick, focused. Instructions flying back and forth like clockwork. Jake and Rex arrived moments later, pushing through the sliding doors. The fluorescent hospital lights glared harshly, a sharp contrast to the quiet, cold streets they had come from. Rex stopped the moment he entered. His ears stood tall. His eyes locked onto the set of doors where Emily and the infants had disappeared. His body was tense, his tail stiff. He would not relax. Not until he knew they were safe. Jake guided him gently toward the waiting area. He gave the dog a quiet pat on the head. "We have to wait, buddy. They are in good hands now." But Rex did not sit. He paced back and forth near the ER entrance. His eyes scanned every nurse, every doctor that walked past. Each time someone in scrubs stepped out, his ears shot up. His eyes searched their face, looking for answers. Jake sat nearby, watching him quietly. He understood. Even though they had made it to safety, the weight of responsibility still clung to his chest. He had seen many things in his years as an officer. But something about this night, this family, felt different. A nurse passed by, then paused beside Rex. She smiled gently and knelt down. Is this your dog? She asked. Jake shook his head. No. He is theirs. Or maybe they are his. The nurse stroked Rex's fur with care. He has not taken his eyes off that door since he came in. Jake nodded slowly. Yeah. He has been protecting them, for a long time. Before the nurse could respond, the emergency doors swung open. A doctor stepped out, pulling down his surgical mask. Jake stood up immediately, and Rex rushed forward, stopping just short of the doctor's feet. How are they? Jake asked. His voice was steady, but tight. The doctor gave a small, tired smile. The babies are stable now. They were severely cold and dehydrated, but we managed to restore their vital signs. Rex let out a soft, relieved whine. His tail wagged, just a little. And the mother? Jake asked. She is still weak, the doctor replied. But she is responding well to treatment. She should wake up soon. Jake nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing. He looked down at Rex. The dog was still staring at the doctor, as if making sure every word he said was true. You hear that, buddy? Jake murmured, kneeling beside him. They are going to be all right. They are okay. Jake's voice was soft, steady. Rex finally sat down. His body relaxed, just slightly. But even as the relief began to settle, he did not move far from the emergency room doors. He would wait. For as long as it took. Hours passed. The hospital began to quiet down. Late night faded into early morning. But Rex stayed alert, his ears twitching at every sound. His eyes remained fixed on the door where Emily and the babies had gone. Jake sat nearby, watching. He had seen loyalty before, but never like this. And then, as the first light of dawn crept in through the hospital windows, a soft voice broke the silence. Rex! The dog's head shot up. His body tensed. Then, without hesitation, he sprang to his feet. Jake stood quickly and followed as Rex rushed down the hallway. They entered the room together. Emily was awake. At first, her eyes fluttered in confusion. She looked around, trying to make sense of the white walls, the quiet hum of machines, the faint beeping. But then, she saw him. Rex stood still, at the foot of her bed, his eyes locked onto hers. He did not move, as if he was afraid to believe it was real. Then slowly, with a soft whimper, he stepped forward. He pressed his cold nose gently against her hand. Emily's lips quivered. You found help, she whispered. Her voice cracked with emotion. Rex exhaled deeply, and then, gently, rested his head on her lap. At last, he allowed himself to rest. Emily's fingers trembled as she stroked his fur. You found help, she whispered again, tears filling her eyes. Jake stood in the doorway, silent, watching the quiet reunion unfold. It was clear now. Rex had not just found her help. He had saved her life. A nurse entered the room, cradling the two babies. Their cheeks were no longer pale, their tiny hands now warm. She placed them carefully in bassinets beside Emily's bed. Emily looked down, overwhelmed. They are okay, she whispered. The nurse nodded with a gentle smile. They are stronger now. They just needed warmth, fluids, and care. Emily looked at Rex again, her voice barely audible. You kept us alive. Rex lifted his head slightly. He walked over and nudged one of the bassinets, as if checking for himself. Jake took a slow step forward. Emily, he said quietly, do you have anywhere to go after this? Family, friends? A shadow crossed her face. She looked away. No. It is just us. Jake had suspected as much. She took a deep breath. I lost everything when I lost my home. And through it all, Rex stayed. She looked at the dog. He never left us. Not once. Jake's chest tightened. He had seen hardship in his life, but never a love this pure, this unwavering. Rex stood beside the bassinets, still watching over the only family he had ever known. And as Jake looked at him, he made a decision. He would not let them go back to the streets. Not after this. Jake stepped out of the hospital room. Jake stood outside the hospital room, his mind already racing with possibilities. He had to do something. He walked to the front desk, picked up the phone, and dialed his precinct captain. I have a situation, he said quietly, his eyes drifting toward the hospital room. Inside, Rex lay protectively beside Emily. A young mother, 2 infants, and a dog that would rather die than leave them behind. They have nowhere to go. There was a pause on the line. Then the captain sighed. What are you thinking, Reynolds? I am thinking, Jake said firmly, that we can help them. Within the hour, phone calls had been made. A local shelter agreed to provide temporary housing, and a program for struggling mothers had offered to help Emily get back on her feet. When Jake returned to the hospital room, Emily looked up with tired, weary eyes. You do not have to go back out there, he told her softly. We found a place for you and the babies. Somewhere safe. Her lips trembled. Her eyes shone with tears. She was too exhausted to cry. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. Rex lifted his head, his eyes meeting Jake's. Jake smiled gently, and gave the dog a small nod. Looks like your work is not done yet, buddy, he murmured. Rex let out a soft huff, as if he already knew. He was never going to leave them. A few days later, Emily and her babies were ready to be released from the hospital. Jake arrived to pick them up. As he walked through the halls, he approached their room, then paused at the door. Rex was curled up beside the bassinets, his body still positioned protectively between Emily and the babies. Even in sleep, his ears twitched at the faintest sound, his instincts never resting. Emily sat on the bed, one twin cradled in her arms. The other slept peacefully nearby. She looked up and smiled softly when she saw Jake. It still does not feel real, she whispered. I keep thinking I will wake up, back in that alley. Jake shook his head. That is not going to happen. Not anymore. A nurse entered with final paperwork. Your transportation is here, she said kindly. Everything has been arranged. Emily nodded. She looked down at Rex. Come on, boy. Time to go home. At the word home, Rex's ears perked up. He stood, stretched slowly, and padded toward Emily. His tail wagged gently. Outside, a car waited at the hospital entrance. Jake walked beside them as they stepped into the morning light. The door opened, and Rex jumped in first. He settled beside the babies, his body relaxed, but still alert, claiming his place. Jake chuckled quietly. Yeah, I figured you would do that. Emily turned to Jake, her eyes full of quiet gratitude. Thank you for everything. Jake nodded once. You have a second chance now. Make the most of it. As the car pulled away, Rex sat tall beside his family. His amber eyes watched the world blur past. But this time, he was not scanning for danger. He was not searching for help. He had already found it. And as the road stretched out ahead of them, so did the life they would build together.